Excuse me, Mr. DJ.
Hey, check this out. We got a great show coming your way.
From the ECSI Sports Studios, it's the Midday Market Report with Jeff Dawson.
Good afternoon, sports fans from all around the globe. I am the host, Jeff Dawson, East Coast Sports Investors, and this is our weekly Dawg and Desperado Fantasy Football Show, episode 11, Friday, September 29th, 2023. Yes, week 4 in the NFL. One game already in the books, and oh boy, did the Lions make a statement. They're a team to reckon with. 2-0 on the road this year with wins in Kansas City and last night in Lambeau Field. I think the biggest take I've gotten so far from the Lions is their defense and Aiden Hutchinson putting pressure on the quarterback and really played well. I know some people say, oh, the Lions could be 4-0. Well, yeah, you lost at home to Seattle, but I also think you were very fortunate to beat Kansas City with no Chris Jones or Travis Kelce. So take the game and a half lead with pride. Take the extra 10 days off and get healthy. Just a couple more weeks away from Jameis Williams, part 3, I think it is, after his 6-game suspension, bye week coming up for them. But we got a lot to talk about today. I want to talk about some regular season stuff with Mr. Childs. I want to go over, the big question, and which is all over social media, which he knows. We've already actually talked about it early this morning. And then get into the DraftKings $1 million maker. There is a game in London today on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. So Falcons and Jaguars are off the ticket, and then the primetime game at 8:20. Kansas City travels to the Jets, so no Mahomes, no Kelce, no Kansas City D. So interesting to see where Mr. Child's eyes are. But without further ado, let's bring him in, the one and only Mr. Shawn Childs.
Well, I'm at the golf course. No. Just representing the Ryder Cup. I don't know why we didn't get a chance to play on that team based on the way they're going, right?
I woke up early this morning. They were down 4-0 in the early matches, and I watched the second half, and Rory's match was over before it started. They birdied like 8 of the first 9 holes. We're up 6 early. And then to just watch the U.S. have 3 matches that they were winning coming in the closing holes. And you know what? It's something about the European team. When it comes to the Ryder Cup, they're just built differently. They talk about Seve Ballesteros. They talk about the old timers and the pride that they have. And not that the U.S. doesn't have pride, but I always talk about, it seems like these USA teams are forced together, and it's more of an I versus the European team. And just watching the closing holes, chipping in 3 times in the afternoon matches. Victor Hovland, who has been just amazing this year, close out a match with a 26-footer. And then Justin Rose with a putt to win and to have the match. So I think the U.S. is down, instead of potentially 5-3, it's like 6.5 to 1.5 or something stupid. But it is what it is. So we watched last night's game. We've talked about for weeks and months, you and I, as we got into draft mode and all your projections, and we're putting together our teams for the season long. And I said something in August, late July, as I did my draft champions teams, and then still in August, and I'm shaking my head. I'm like, the gift that keeps giving, picking up front, either early 6th round or 7-10, 7-11, even 7-12. That's David Montgomery. I'm like, guys, I'm not calling him Jamal Williams, but it looks like the perfect set. And then obviously they moved up and they got Mr. Gibbs. And Gibbs, we've talked about, look like Alvin Kamara 2.0, just the skill set and the actual thought process of how they were going to use him. For me, in my season long yesterday, I don't want to say too cute. I used injury. I used short week. I used divisional play. I used Jamar Gibbs and said, well, you know what? I'm not going to run to the window. And I don't want to use the word force Montgomery, Shawn. But I played him in some spots, but now I'm begging to the fantasy gods, Javonte Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, and I think even in one or two spots, Devin Achane. So 34 points, I'll never get back on some of these teams. Give us your thoughts about Detroit. Give us your thoughts about Montgomery. And then give us your honest thoughts, I assume, your frustrations with the usage so far of Jamar Gibbs.
Yeah, I mean, the Lions, I really liked them last year, and they kind of came on, and, Goff, eliminated the turnovers, and they gave, St. Brown a phenomenal receiver. They just need that second wideout to provide a little bit deep threat, and maybe Williams is doing that. I thought Gibbs was going to be a lot more active. Thought he had a chance to catch, 70 passes this year. I mean, he caught four passes last night for 11 yards. They're just close to the line of scrimmage or not in space. And Gibbs was lucky to get 8 carries. And, when the game was out of hand, even in the last few minutes, they just kept piling on to Montgomery. He gets the extra 5 or 6 carries where, Gibbs might have had a chance to, maybe get that late rush where he breaks a short run for, 40 yards and a touchdown. But, Montgomery, hey, he looks good. And I would say that, Gibbs, is disappointing as he has been. He hasn't scored any touchdowns. His catchers are okay, and the game flow and, the score. I mean, last week they were playing ahead against Atlanta. This week they were playing ahead again. So they haven't had that chaser game where they had to really feature the running back in the passing game, like kind of on the dink and dunk stuff. So he'll have better outcomes than that. I think his yards aren't ideal, but I think he's not that far off of still gaining 1,000 combined yards. So, it's obviously we're disappointed because he's basically, he's probably given us an 8th or 9th round running back stats and getting drafted in the 3rd round. And, but, who's to say at the end of the year he doesn't come on? So Montgomery, probably used them a lot more than you yesterday. I looked at a bunch of spots. I had some teams with Barkley, say, and somebody else, even like a Barkley Brees Hall team. Like Hall hasn't done much. So let's just put in, Montgomery. If, Barkley doesn't play, at least I got Brees Hall rather than passing on the guy. And I honestly had him, Montgomery rated for 15 carries and, maybe like 1 catch and, high chance at a touchdown. But, he exceeded expectations. He really gave you, I mean, that was kind of a 2.5 time game. He's kind of a guy that if he could average 15 points is fine. And but he end up with 3 touchdowns, 18, 20, and he's got whatever the yards. So, he's, a pretty impressive game for him. And, like you said, unfortunate if people sat him, but it's dependent on team structure and what you thought of him.
Moving forward, initially, again, we don't panic here. We don't chase points, but moving forward, was it bye week 6 for the Lions? Is that correct?
For the Goff 9, bye week 9.
9. Okay. All right. So there's some time. So moving forward, obviously, it doesn't matter at this point. Again, injuries and health is the big point. But, obviously Monty will be the goal line back, or he is right now. You're going to put him in as your RB. He wasn't drafted as an RB1. That's the comical part. He was drafted in the 6th, 7th round. He was an RB2 or a flex play. But moving forward, you're definitely going to be playing him moving forward. And again, someone like yourself that has Gibbs everywhere, still an auto play, a flex play, or is there more moving forward based upon matchups? Is it a wait and see, or it's still you're grabbing the bulls by the horn here and you're still sticking with them?
Well, I mean, you drafted him for his explosiveness. You've taken a beating, and what do you have? 9.1 points this week, and last week he had 80 yards and maybe a couple yards receiving and one catch, so about the same, 9, and the other two games were nothing really. The first game he had 60 yards and a couple catches, so he's averaging like 9 fantasy points a game or something. You throw one touchdown, he's probably over 10 and a half. Gets a little more action. He's not that far off a flex play, but most likely you drafted him as your RB2, I would think. In most teams, I drafted Bijan Robin or somebody in round 1, got him around 3 or 4. So I think you just have to deal with him because his range of outcomes could be really, really high where you're going to replace him with some other running back, and they're, what is their ceiling? What's their explosiveness? So he's kind of believing the player, but maybe there's a team that you hit on another late running back or something like that, and you have an option. But for now, I got at one high dollar team I did with Kimra that I have like a Jonathan Taylor, who I drafted in the 8th round, which he should have been a really draft pick. So if he plays next week or 2 weeks and he's on the field and he's getting most of the action, I mean, obviously he would jump Gibbs in the starting lineup for sure. But it's team structure, and I think if I have him, I have probably some decent receivers and hopefully a decent quarterback, and I'm just gonna hopefully he's the guy that's the better player in the second half of the year.
It's not where you start; it's obviously where you finish. Flip side onto the Packer side, Aaron Jones did play, nowhere to be found. AJ Dillon. Wow, I was real high on him last year. I had paired him with Ramondre Stevenson, who has been bad to start this year. I hit on Stevenson and missed on Dillon till December. Christian Watson made his debut. Did get a touchdown score there. Jaden Reed, I think a 2-point conversion, I think, if I remember correctly. Jordan Love, again, not a lot of time. Looked okay, but what's your look moving forward on the Green Bay side?
Yeah, they've got their left tackle, I think, was hurt, missed the game, and they had somebody else get hurt in that game. I think Runyon. Kind of disappointing. And then Detroit really kind of exposed their offensive line problems early in the game in the first half. In the second half, they got some pressure sometimes, but Love was able to complete some passes. He's got to do a better job on some of the plays downfield. He's had numerous times this year where a guy's kind of been open. He's overthrown him, kind of and probably under duress a little bit, but still a guy's pretty wide open, not in tight coverage. He's got to, do a better job getting the ball to those guys. But he's ranked pretty high overall. But I don't expect the running back situation in Detroit. I mean, Jones is obviously more explosive, and he caught a couple balls last night. But it's really kind of messy. I mean, I guess Jones is a play if you have him, and Dillon's just hoping for late season in the weather and maybe cover a bye week. But he's getting minimal catches, and he's unplayable. I had a team last week. I had scored 152 with Dillon scored 3 points. My bright idea was to play Deuce Vaughn as my RB2 because I had, I think it might have been Montgomery team was hurt. So I slipped in Vaughn, but I thought they would beat Arizona, play from the lead and get some mop up. He didn't even see the field, and they end up, the game going the other direction. And I could have played Edwards-Helaire instead and got like 12 more points, and I still would have lost like 172, 165. But, I just made a bad decision there. And you just, you make a few of those over the course of the year, and you still you'll fall short sometimes of making the postseason.
In the intro, I talked about the London game, which takes 2 teams off the board for you as you're trying to put together your $1 million maker. Again, also no Kansas City this week with them playing at 8:00. No Mahomes, no Kels, and then no Pacheco, CEH, or however you're going to go that way. On the flip side for the Jets, no Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall again. Last time he was on primetime, maybe, I don't know. Opening week against Buffalo, he had the 70-yard run, and he had like a 38-yard run. Maybe they give him the ball more. Most likely will be playing from behind. My numbers are a 9 and a 44. It's already down to 41 with an 8.5. So they're not expecting a lot of bounce back, or should we say, as we like to say, game flow in that game. But looking at the slate so far this week, Shawn, and your projections, the Millie Maker, let's get the fans and everyone watching a shout out to Denzel. He says, good afternoon, Jeff and Shawn. Big weekend in sports. And I said 100% yes, indeed. So give us your thought process so far. Let's start in the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I did the quarterbacks for the DFS stuff, and did 6 of them maybe, and a couple high end, couple middle, mid tier, and bottom end. And at the top end, I mean, we're gonna everybody's excited about the Miami offense. Their running backs were phenomenal last week. They're going into Buffalo. Allen's really kind of underperformed over the first 2 games as far as he's fantasy points. He's in the mid 20s. Good games and stuff like that, but you expect him to, once in a while to, pop in the 30s, be a little more active in the run game. The defense played really well against Washington. They're going home. Can they pump the brakes on the excitement for the Miami Dolphins, going there? And they don't have the benefit of playing them in December when weather's more of a factor. So Miami has to be a little more excited about that. So Allen, he's the type of guy, his salary's top shelf, 8,200 in DraftKings. So he needs really, 32, 33 points to fill like his salary bucket. He's done pretty well against Miami in the past, but I got him rated 2.5 touchdowns, 50% chance of scoring a rushing touchdown. So the overall structure for him looks pretty good. I expect him to throw for 300 yards. On the flip side, Tua has not been that great in his last few games in Buffalo, but this team's a lot better than it was, last year. I would think what they're doing with the run game, and I still think Buffalo can be a little bit suspect, in their run defense. It hasn't really been exposed so far this season. I mean, last week, the Washington lead back, Brian Robinson, was 10 for 70, but he only got 10 carries, and the game flow, they were behind. They had to throw. Buffalo got 9 sacks, so it was different. So, Tua. Hill, has got Jalen Waddle this week, and he's been kind of quiet. Maybe he has a game. Hill last year didn't do much against Buffalo. He did have the last year with Kansas City in the postseason. He was like 11 for 150 and a touchdown. That was pretty good. Those are the type of games that you're hoping that Hill can have, especially in a big matchup. Last year, Hill was like maybe an every other week player. Gets 11 for 150, and then kind of a quiet game and the big game. So he's kind of kept that mode first week. This week, 11, 215 and a touchdown. Doesn't do much against the Patriots. And then he was 9 for 115 and a touchdown, I believe, last week. So, does he have another game? I'm not sure. So I'm kind of leaning like Miami. Tour is kind of a fade for me, but, I always tell, my friend Chris Schenker that, sometimes it's about 2-game winning streaks in this, daily. When teams are playing well, you want to get on them. And when players are doing stuff, you got to get on them. So, Mostert, he played really well against New England. He had follow-through game. The Devon A-Chain had a big game. People are going to slip his lineup. Does he pay people back and give him that short game? I'm not sure, but his salary is $5,600, a little bit higher. So, those are the kind of that first matchup is kind of, where you have to either decide you're in or out of. The secondary game most likely is probably, I would think, the Chargers against the Raiders, expecting, so they got some decent offensive players. Mike Williams not playing. Keenan Allen's been phenomenal, but can these guys, can they just have these game after game? I mean, we've seen Justin Jefferson 3 straight games, impressive start to the year. Allen, really good start to the year, but this is the NFL. Sometimes they have that 6 for 60 and they don't score a touchdown. So, but that's the secondary. And I mean, in the second, and the Chargers also have, Palmer and Quentin Johnston, as some fill-in. So there's enough, even though you're losing Mike Williams, those 2 players added up could fill that void pretty well, I think. And then they even have, if Eckler does indeed come back, does he? I don't know if the last update is he say he's playing. I had him rated as playing, but I wasn't confident. When is he supposed to play?
Last update, I think he's out.
his last one's update. So that changes the profile when I update the projections tonight. I usually try to do it later on. I didn't really, there wasn't, yesterday, I guess I could have downgraded Watson a little bit more because it looked like he was going to be limited. And, I didn't think I thought Jones would be, have his normal role, but just the game went sideways. So, but I'll update the projections later. The other,
let me just ask a quick question by Mr. Dwade. Karen Williams or Kamara with Winston playing, assuming a bunch of checkdowns and opportunities for Kamara?
Well, I mean, you would think initially with Kamara back in the lineup that the running back position starts to get some catches for the Saints. It hasn't really been a factor the first 3 games, and the offense will be, different with Kamara. Kamara will be a little bit better at the goal line, the red zone, and we're on the assumption that Kamara is going to be the good Kamara of a couple of years ago too. As far as Williams, he's on the field 100% of snaps last week, 95% the week before. He's got, most of the carries for the team, and he's had 19 targets, which is surprising, but he's only has caught 7 or 8 of those balls this year. So that's kind of disappointing. So I would think that Kamara has more of a proven resume. I like the matchup a little bit better. I would probably go with Kamara. But, there is something to said for, being on the field for all those plays. Because even with Kamara coming back, there will be another back that will get some touches for the Saints.
Mr. Russell Saylor, good afternoon. A big Colt fan. He goes, Karen Wilson is facing a stout Colts run defense.
When
so
did
he said he?
I don't remember the year the Colts ever had a stout run defense. Was that the last 20 years, or when was that?
Defense actually a couple of years ago they were rounding into form. Again, I talked to you off air about that total, about that game. I had a 45.5 with the Rams at 1. It's been pushed up to as high as 47 at South Point. So I do think there's some points that'll be scored. And I did get the update, Russ. Richardson was upgraded to probable, so Richardson will be starting there. But go ahead.
The Colts defense had 3.0 yards per rush the first game, 2.0 in the second game. Jacksonville and Houston last week, 37 for 186, 5 yards per carry, but most of that came from the quarterback position. 14 for 101 from Lamar Jackson. So, to running backs, they played really well. Have they reached elite level? We'll see when they play a little bit running back, because really Baltimore, didn't have a really explosive. Houston, their running backs haven't done much, but Jacksonville did get a hit on a run from ETN for 26 yards for a touchdown, and Bigsby scored at the goal line. So far so good for the Colts, and we'll see how it is over the long haul.
Dwayne asked another question. Who will have a bigger week in your mind, Thielen or Higgins? I did not draft Thielen in one spot, and great start. And let me just say, Mr. Higgins, Bagel opening week, 28.4 in the second week. And then third week, it was the Jamar Chase show.
Yeah, I mean, Thielen, he had that kind of good game 2 weeks ago. The change in quarterback led to 58 passes last week. Obviously, had a great game. I don't think, he's kind of a guy that you caught 2 games in a row out of. They're going back to their rookie quarterback, I believe, this week, Young. The 2 weeks before, last week, the Carolina receivers had 287 yards receiving. The 2 previous weeks, 68 and 95 yards. I think that if you caught Thielen for 2 weeks, you got a lot. This is the week to probably fade him back. And I would never play Thielen consistently over Higgins. Higgins is just a kind of a more of a rising player, and he has the big game ability. The matchup against Tennessee is really, really good. I get the frustration, 2 bad games and 1 good game, but Thielen didn't do much the first week, and he did, was the top receiver for the Panthers in the second game. But you catch the 2 good games, might be a good game to kind of fade it a little bit, I think, this week, even though it's the Vikings look like it's supposed to be a good game, but he is facing his former team.
Russell said cluster injuries right now on the O line for the Colts. Indy might be without both tackles and center, and I think there's a guy on the other side, Mr. Sailor, called Aaron Donald, who might actually, though, with Richardson, that might help, obviously, with a lot more mobile quarterback. So could be Richardson running for his life there. We'll have to see there. All right, so go on. You said not Rams. You talked about the Chargers and the Raiders. I'm looking at Tampa and the Saints, Washington, Philly. Joe Burrow travels to the Titans. New England at Dallas, and then, of course, Arizona at 49ers. Anything there grab you?
I mean, Burrow rates well, but it's the Burrow of, last year, So, he threw the ball 49 times last week. Chase got going. T. Higgins obviously did not. He missed, threw an interception to Boyd. Had no tight end there. Didn't really run the ball well against the Rams. I don't expect them to run the ball against Tennessee, but they'll have chances. Tennessee's given a lot, over 200 yards receiving in all 3 games, 2 wide receivers. So it's set up for Burrow to kind of have a decent game, but at the same time, he needs Tennessee to play a lot better offensively. They did nothing against Cleveland. They should be better at home, but, that game's got to be, Cincinnati's got to be forced to score 30 points. With Cousins a little banged up, they're more willing to pump the brakes on him. I mean, not Cousins, Burrow, a little banged up. They're more willing to pump the brakes on his usage if they do play from the lead, and they'll play a little more conservative. So I think Burrow's viable, and I have Chase rated pretty high. But, Tennessee, can they score? Kind of think Fields projected well this week. Obviously you got to go against Denver's defense that gave a bunch of points. Fields should run the ball a little bit better. He does have like over 200 yards passing each game. And if you could really compare it to last year, he really started really slow off the first 5 games last year. People were really excited about his midseason. He had a couple 40-point games, but that's what you're drafting that guy for that potential. And he has to make some more big runs to be more viable and, be active, scoring touchdowns at the goal line. So, a game at home, they don't look that attractive for anything. And I imagine people will sit them, but if they're playing against the Broncos, I think you have to ride with them. They invested an early pick. And, what quarterback did you draft late? I mean, I guess if you had Cousins with Fields, that's a different debate because Cousins is leading all quarterbacks in scoring, but he's also averaging 46 passes a game, which isn't really out of line because that's what we thought when we were doing the research for them anyway. So, but Fields is intriguing. I'm more apt to don't think it's that great of a matchup for DJ Moore. He might get some stuff, but I think Komet might be able to do something in this game. And it's always a tell when we play in the high stakes market. When players get dropped, they usually present themselves as the best players to get picked up next week. So I think Komet, you look at him, I don't have the numbers right in front of me. Maybe I do, but like I think I do have the numbers. Let's see, tight ends. Last year, compared to last year, he's on pace for to catch 62 passes for 589 yards. Which it doesn't blow your doors off. But last year they threw the ball 377 times, and he had he's ahead of that pace in catches, and he had a few more yards, but he scored 7 touchdowns, and his 7 touchdowns all came over the last 10 games of the season. So, is he not going to score all season? Is he not that great of a player? But, the Bears have shown that they're willing to throw the ball more. Last year Fields had, I think, 25 pass. What did he have over there? 45 pass attempts over the first 3 games last year. That's it. He was like, 297 yards. He was averaging 100 yards a game over the first 3 games. So just in general, they're almost throwing the ball twice as much. They've been bad, and they played Kansas City, and they couldn't go out on the field. So I think that the Fields to Komet thing's kind of intriguing to me this week in the DFS market. And Komet's, 4,000, kind of in a funny price. Most of the at DraftKings, the tight ends are kind of relatively weak. The only one that kind of stood up in the mid range was Kittle, because Kittle had 4 touchdowns last year in both games against Arizona. Didn't have a ton of yards, 4 for 84 and 4 for 29. But the year before that, he had a decent game. But Kittle fits where he might be able to get 20 points, especially with Debo banged up, and then IU coming off the shoulder. So it might be Kittle's turn. He showed a little bit of direction. So, but as far as, back to Chicago, I think that, Fields should be a little more active there at quarterback. And then, when you go a little further down the food chain, I think that, obviously Russell Wilson going against the Bears defense, that has to be in play a little bit. You'd like to see Jerry Jeudy kind of do something. He hasn't done it yet. Mims has been exceptional, but he's only been on the field for like 24% of their plays. How can they not get that guy on the field more? He's got to be their best, their third best wide receiver on the team. So they need to get him in the mix, but they've been made, Denver has made some big passing plays this year. I think overall Russell Wilson has got a little more better bounce in the step. Even the game score hasn't gone that way. Their running backs are a little more active than you thought catching the ball. I think they have 25 catches, and I think they rate pretty highly in the league as far as targets. They just haven't made many big plays. I think they're averaging, 3.8 yards per rush and like 5.8 yards per catch. They need to be 4.5 and get closer to 7.5 to kind of justify supporting those things. So I think, Russell Wilson and the receivers there are kind of like if you play in the Bears, there's going to be some options to go the other way. Jameis Winston draws the Tampa, relatively cheap. He's 5,300. I really like Chris Olave this week in that matchup. Tampa's given up some big games to wide receivers. I think that's pretty, and he played well against them last year. I think that kind of sets up well for him. He just, needs to get that touchdown and, maybe two. But, there's the opportunities for them to do it a little bit better, especially when you add in Kamara. He could catch a pass for a touchdown. I mean, the Saints have really been kind of dogs scoring the ball over the first three games, scoring, less than 20 points a game on the average. But, playing at home, we've seen him play well in the past. Winston has enough experience. I think a couple of years ago, 2021, he had a 5-touchdown game, a 4-touchdown game. Really didn't do much last year, but when he played Thomas over the first three games, Thomas, averaged, 17, 18 fantasy points with him in the lineup. So he'll get his chances. So I think there's, Winston's kind of like a guy you put in there you don't feel good about, like, hey, I'm putting Jameis Winston in the thing, and is that really his DFS lineup? But you do save the salary and hopefully give yourself some options to get some better players. Olave 7,100 over there, so that's a decent hookup. And the other thing is, like you said, you were looking for, is there game Pittsburgh and Houston? Stroud was a hot item on the waiver wire this week, right? Quarterbacks get a lot of, he was getting a lot of money thrown at him for, usually this time of year, the quarterbacks in the high stakes market, sometimes they end up, you can get those other quarterbacks relatively cheap in the, because they haven't done anything, but he has been productive. So, Pittsburgh's, decent pass rush. Houston hasn't run the ball well. We like Houston's receivers. Dell, Woods has been involved. Collins he didn't do anything last week, probably bounce back. That's the exact same reason we're talking about Thielen. Collins, good game, goes to Jacksonville, and then he puts in the clunker. You just, the rhythm of the game. It's sometimes hard to hit those guys that put in the, sit them after, they have a monster game, but, sometimes that's just the nature of the NFL. So, those are some of the quarterback positions. I kind of thought Daniel Jones would be a pretty good play, but he's on Monday night playing against Seattle, rated him for, 75% chance scoring a rushing touchdown and a couple of things. And I know their offensive line's banged up as well, but I thought him and Waller might play well in that matchup.
I agree with a lot that you said. I grabbed Tank Dell late in a lot of drafts. Of course, didn't play him in the first week. Had him, I think, one or two spots in the second week. I did move him in a couple more spots last week. He is really, I think he's averaging 17 fantasy points. The story I heard, which I thought was kind of neat, is when Stroud was drafted, he went to management and says, make sure you draft Tank Dell, please. And they drafted Tank Dell for him. So they got that good rapport already. And me, I've had Nico Collins since diapers. This year I had no Nico. The only guy over there I had was Dell. So I've been quite impressed what I've seen there. Quick question. Stay on Houston for a second. The sizzle, last year's rookie, and a lot of people thought the value play, and he was actually going right around where Montgomery was going, was Damian Pierce. What's going on with Pierce? Is it the O line, or is it the fact that Stroud has had so much success passing that they're not actually worried with the running game right now?
Yeah, they haven't run the ball well, and his playing time, was short last week. I don't have that number in front of me at this computer, but Singletary's been kind of getting a little more stats, but he's kind of a power runner, and he should have some better games. He needs them to run the ball a little bit better. I might be a little banged up. Didn't they have an offensive line problem over there too? I'm not 100% sure. There's been it's crazy. Like a couple of weeks ago, there was like six left tackles that had injuries, and that's like a lot for the league. But Houston just needs to run the ball a little bit better. Pittsburgh's defense, they did really struggle the first two games against running backs. They played Cleveland and San Francisco, right? Gave up well over 180 yards, I believe, in both games. Did a little bit better last week. But so he is a player that's kind of, you're disappointed and not excited. He did, even though he's not highly active in the passing game, he did have, I think he had 3 catches last week and maybe 2 the week before. So that's at least helps his floor a little bit. But it's not as clean a ride as people thought. I thought Singletary would be 38%, 40% giving in the mix. He got a little more action last week. I don't think Singletary's that really a threat at the goal line if they get there and get some passive interference calls. But, so he's just, he's kind of like falls into, you can think of him as like a Gibbs, like just kind of not getting it done. And, but, will he finally pop? And, what will he do when he gets, has his kind of really, really good games? So I don't own him anywhere.
Looking, Philly 16-0 against the Pats, played grab ass the last 3 quarters. Week 2, drawing a brain cramp here. Who they have week 2? They were at home against, was it the Giants? Oh, no, that was Dallas. Who did Philly have week 2?
They played a division game. They ran. That's the game that the Swift had all the rushing yards. They
were at Minnesota. They had the primetime game against Minnesota. They got out and then they let Minnesota come back. Just another grab ass game. And then against Tampa, I don't want to say they're going through the motions. The sense of urgency. They said Jalen Hurts was a little sick. When you can run for a bazillion yards and you got such a good defense, I'm not saying they're going through the motions, but my point here is, AJ Brown, he was force reading AJ Brown. The wide receivers haven't got off like we thought. Jalen Hurts, other than the tush push, really isn't running a ton. In comes Washington. I think it was week 8 or 9 or something last year. Washington came in 9-point underdogs and defeated them outright for Philly's first loss last year. From a fantasy point, can you see Philly going back to Philly against this Washington team? I mean, I had an initial over-under of 46. It's down to 43 now with an 8-point favorite. But is Philly and Hurts trying to get A.J. Brown going, Goddard and Smith? I mean, they're running with Swift till the cows come home. You and I could run through some of those holes. But do you got to start maybe backing off a little on the DFS side on A.J. Brown and Devontae?
Yeah, it's weird that you go into this week and you think it hurts is kind of like a little bit against the grain. Like you're kind of like thinking they haven't been that great. They've scored 84 points over the first 3 weeks. They've kicked 9 field goals and 8 touchdowns. And they've had 35 possessions. So they've scored half the time and they feel like they're disappointing, right? Last year, Philly had 59 touchdowns and 22 field goals on 186 possessions. So they were a lot more explosive. So they are trailing in there. They've given up, a few more sacks than they thought they would. Their offensive line has given a shorter passing window to Hurts. And, last year he kind of had, he's back there sometimes had a lot of time to throw. But they have picked up the pace. Swift really established the run game against Minnesota, came back and had follow through. So that's, you would think that they're kind of due for a much better game against Washington. Last year, Hurts threw for 360 yards and 3 touchdowns in one game. And the other game at home, he had 203 combined yards and 3 touchdowns. So, on the surface, he's trailing. Last year, he averaged 8.1 yards per pass attempt. This year, he's 6.9. So there is a correction game coming. Is it going to come against the Commanders? I'm not 100% sure, but he has the potential to really kind of pop, especially if he hits on a couple of big plays, one of them going for a touchdown, and he does get his weekly 1-yard run and maybe something else with it. So there's a lot to like there, but his salary is still relatively high, and I don't think that people feel as confident as the Eagles like dominating as far as passing as they did as last year, but they will run the ball well.
Marcos asked a question, and if I'm reading this right, Marcos, I know what Shawn's going to answer already, and I'll let him answer this question. But I have a clear cut here. Marcos asked you, half-point PPR, Shawn. I got offered Ridley for either Miles Sanders or Jerome Ford. My other running backs are Mozart, Pollard, JT. What do you guys think of Ridley going forward? My first thought process is I would run to the window and drive a Miles Sanders to get Ridley. Do not trade Jerome Ford. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, either one of them. I would think that Ridley, is an upgrade. I don't know what his wide receivers are, but he's going to be a lockdown top 3 receiver, even a top 2 receiver in most fantasy leagues. Been disappointed in 2 games. Sanders doesn't have some underlying issue that he played last year. He was on the injury report. Yeah. And then there was something that was kind of weird, like it might be a lingering problem. So Sanders did pretty well, but you got Pollard and you got some help there. So I would make that deal. Yeah, I would. And like I said, it'd be Sanders. I could, Ford. I guess it's a coin flip. Depending on where your stance is, how much Hunt will be in the way. But he's looked okay, and Cleveland's, run the ball pretty well overall, and they play good defense. So kind of unproven, but I either one of them, I'd be okay with either one of them. I'll let you make the stance that Sanders is the guy you'd like to email to him, or send over. But
yeah, I listen. The O-line for Cleveland is legit. I'm not comparing Jerome Ford obviously to Nick Chubb. I personally am not worried with Hunt. I think. They just added Deion Jackson this week too, I think it was. And they do have Pierre Strong back there. But my point is their defense is, I don't use this word often, but pretty much almost elite at this point, top 5 defense with a good running game. I would hold on to Ford, but I would send Mr. Sanders very quickly over there and grab Ridley before he changes his mind on that one. So, Shawn, wide receivers and tight ends. We're about 45 minutes in. I know you talked about a few of them. Justin Jefferson is at Carolina. I know his price point's going to be through the roof. Actually, let me backtrack for 1 second, Shawn. Christian McCaffrey, as we were drafting our regular season high stakes teams, Jefferson was the automatic first pick. And then you had a decision with the Cup injury. Were you going to move Chase up or were you going to take CMC? I've been a CMC owner. I've had the good, and of late I had the bad. And he comes over from Carolina. He has a great second half with the 49ers. I asked a lot of people in these lanes, when is the last starting running back from day one from the 49ers lasted through the full year? And I can't remember the last one. And my point was, I took Chase over McCaffrey in the first 3 weeks. He's been amazing. But my question to you is, when you're trying to hit the $1 million or you're trying to hit the $250,000 and you got the top of the heaps at quarterbacks, the Allens, the Mahomes, at running back, the CMCs, at the wide receiver, Jefferson, do you almost say, hey, someone else has got to beat me because the price point's too much? Or do you sometimes try to stick that square peg in the round hole?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you want them to get certain amount over their salary. And I always use the reference at DraftKings when you're trying to win the Millionaire Maker. It's got to be like 4 times their salary, their potential, right? But at the same time, each slot in your lineup is worth a certain value. In order to get, 230 points, you might need 30 at quarterback. You need that front running back to get 30. You need 20 at your second running back. You need one big receiver to get 30. So all these slots things. So even though his salary is 9,200, he has a good chance of, filling that 30-point slot. In the first 3 games of the year, McCaffrey has not been a great play in the DFS market. He scored, I think, 22, 25, and 27 or something like that. And I think that the opportunity is there. He has a touchdown in 12 straight games. But out of all those games, he only scored 2 touchdowns once. Is he capable of scoring 3 touchdowns in a game for San Francisco? Absolutely. If they do play from the lead and playing like in Arizona and blow them out, they are going to rest him. They had him on the field last week for 61% of their plays compared to 100% the week before. So that kind of changes some things there. But, then you kind of look at the game and it's like, is this going to be the 49er game similar to what, Miami did last week? Maybe not at that explosive level, but, where McCaffrey gets a lot of action, has a big game, and he has an impact value. So I think that his catch has only been, kind of short of 3.7 per week for catches, 3, and 5, I think it was Ben. But I think that he's got a great floor. He just needs a second touchdown to get into 30 points. And he probably needs the game flow to be a little bit from behind or have to push the scoreboard to get those other follow through and say, 30 to 50 yards more and a few more catches to kind of get that really good, 35 plus number that you're looking for his salary. But there's nothing wrong with him. I drafted him in front of, I was more of Fade and Cup this year because I didn't like what was going on there. You ask me right now if Cup was healthy next week. I do like, the way the other receivers have looked right there, the running backs and pretty active. So my stance on Cup would be a lot better than it was before the season in the Rams. But, we cannot go back in time and switch our decisions, but I have McCaffrey in a few spots and I got him at pick 4. I was happy with that. At least one of them. And then, I didn't have to go indulgent because that might've been when Cup was a little banged up. I didn't have to take a Kelsey in the first round or take a Eckler or, take a stance on a player that I really, really didn't feel that I was trusted this year. So, but McCaffrey, he's a really good player. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be a beast.
I got a shout out to Denzel. He did some quick research for us. 2014, Frank Gore, 255 rushes over 1,100 yards, 4.3 yards per carry. Good job, D. Thank you so much. That's the last one that started as the number 1 and ended as the number 1 and made it through a full season without injury. Before we wrap up, Shawn, you talked about Kittle at tight end. Any other tight ends that might slip through the cracks? And then defense. Is it as simple as, spending the money for, say, San Fran this week? Maybe you get cute and grab Philly. Where else could my eyes go here?
Well, your guy, your guy Marco was it the guy from Indy? His name Marco?
No, that's Mr. Sailor is from Indy.
Oh, that gentleman, he just kind of gave you a hint that their offensive line's kind of banged up. Could the Rams defense be kind of sneaky and Darnold?
Oh, the Rams?
Yeah, I mean,
but I mean,
Cleveland looks good
with
too.
Richardson, it makes it tough.
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore's offense hasn't been that great, and Cleveland's defense was it's weird. Cleveland's defense is like 2,800 at DraftKings, and Baltimore's a lot higher, but Cleveland's defense has played a lot better than Baltimore, and Baltimore can still be suspect in the secondary. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And then a lot of times when you're looking at the defenses, you're looking at the bottom 4 or 5 because you want to save that salary. So, Arizona's last. You got the Raiders down the bottom. I think Miami's playing Buffalo, but, Miami maybe could surprise a little bit and they make a play or something like that. But, so it's just, finding the right range to fit in. And it depends on the game. You're playing in the Millionaire Maker, you're going to have to hit on the defense like last week. Buffalo, scores 32 points. If, you're missing, the week I had a really good thing last year, I had the Jets and they scored 10. It wasn't some crazy defense that pushed it around. But when there is a defense that score in the 20s, that is enough to push you over the top. But if you play in like a single entry, a 3-team max, or 50-50, the defense is less important because the overall score you're shooting for is less. So, they're always tricky. And when you're looking at them, the obvious ones are probably not the one for the week, because like last week, the Jets were 2,800. They were playing the Patriots, right? I think they got a 0, and then, you got the Buffalo hasn't been that great. They're playing Washington. They were 3,200. Seemed like it was viable. And then, Buffalo ends up getting 9 sacks. Washington's offensive line has already given up 19 sacks. Doesn't that tell you that Philly's going to find their pass rush in this game, right? Have a few turnovers, score a short field. And that's really the thing for Hurts when we talked about earlier. You give them the 30, 40-yard field. I mean, that team could score a lot more points. But tight ends, obviously Kelsey plays on the short thing, so it doesn't matter. Kittle, I mentioned. Andrews is interesting is that, if Cleveland could score, he hasn't really, wasn't really do much last week. And his 2 matchups against the Browns, he had no catches for 4 yards in one game and 3 for 37 on 9 targets, both games against Cleveland last year. The year before, I think he was 11 for 115 and 1 in his one game that he played, or the game in Cleveland. So he's the type of guy that's come in relatively quiet, but he's a good player to go against if you play the Browns. But it doesn't look on paper like he's ideal, even with salaries a little bit lower, 5,400. And he's a guy that, you think that he had a good game. He could be 8 for 100 and he could score 2 touchdowns. Like, he checks a lot of boxes as far as potential is fantasy scoring. But I don't know when, especially the receivers at the Ravens haven't materialized. Beckham hurt, Bateman's, banged up, Flowers is not blooming, right? He's been okay, the first game, but, he's, kind of the quick guy, and he can add support to cover him when the other guys are hurt. So there, and then Freiermuth is kind of a sneaky guy for me. I think he kind of fits the profile. Last year, he had like 70-something yards in 4 games. He had 8 catches in 4 or 5 games. He's scored 2 touchdowns, really hadn't much happen this year. He's playing Houston. You need the quarterback to play, and he really could be the second option in the passing game behind, George Pickens, at least this part of the season. So I think he's kind of undervalued. I think he might end up being a play that for me in the prop market. I think his over under in yards is like 31.5. So I think that's kind of an interesting guy. So I think that he's relatively cheap, a really good salary saver at 3,400. I threw in just for kicks. I keep riding that Kincaid, and I heard somebody doing a show this week, like no short roster formats, dump Kincaid, get rid of him. And I get it. When you're playing in those ESPN and Yahoo leagues and there's only 16 roster spots, you're most likely going to have your tight end that you're going to play, and everybody else is in the free agent pool. So I get it, but he's kind of on the field enough, and I think he's the pass catcher. And I think that Miami is pretty good at covering wide receivers. I think they've given up 11 scores to wide receivers over their last 20 games, so they kind of tighten up. So this might be a good game for Buffalo to look for their tight ends in the red zone as far as scoring. So I still think that he's a play for me, but more of a hookup for Allen and more of a DFS, like a millionaire maker, more than a single lineup, where you can gamble on the upside, because they need to have multiple. If he has a 20-point game, he's kind of a really good fit. So, just some of the ones I went through, in the article I did at the site. But, you can kind of do on this, a lot of these numbers there stand out when you're doing the projections. You can kind of see what they're projected for fantasy points and get an idea where they profile. And it's not an exact science, because even though a guy might rate a little bit better, you might like another offense a little better and think he has a better chance of scoring. So it's kind of kind of flavor of the week. But right now I don't have as far as the DFS market, I'm kind of cloudy. It doesn't stand out like, who I want to really kind of, lean on. But sometimes that's a good thing. We'll see what the injuries for the rest of the day today, shake out and make some adjustments, and, we'll see how the puzzle fits. I think Palmer for wide receiver actually is, people will gravitate to him because he's 4,000 at DraftKings. with the Chargers, and the other Johnson guy's 3,700. So he's got a boomer bust feel, but he could pop a long touchdown. And where Palmer, maybe could be 5 for 50 and score a touchdown and kind of support his price point. But he'll also be popular. So do you really want the popular play? Sometimes it's to be the week after, Tank Dell, 4,500. Can he have a 3-game winning streak? Him and Thielen have a 2-game winning streaks. They were really, really good. They were good 2 weeks ago, and they were great last week. And they, what happens this week?
Well, that's the way it is. You miss out on the first week, you jump in on the second week, and then you just parlay it into the third week. We talked last night when you and I were talking, and when I brought up the name A-Chain, and you started to say, well, are you chasing points? And that's the one thing you cannot do in fantasy year long is chase points. There's not anyone unless, if there's a bye week or a wrath of injuries and you had to put A-Chain in last week, God bless you. God bless you. And this week now you're stuck. For me, the Javante, what's killing me, Mr. Childs, is Javante Williams. And the fact that he was playing the Bears this week, that is killing me because, again, I chose him in a couple spots. I chose Pacheco in a couple spots just because Montgomery was hurt. And then I think actually in one spot, I was like, you know what, I'll take the healthy player, game flow. I don't know what I'm going to get from A-Chain. I don't. I'm not chasing the 50 points. I got a Mozart A-Chain team. I'm not running out the pair here because, hey, I got 100 points from them last week combined. But my point is chasing those points. And and I know we can't do that here in this.
Well, I think that falls more time. I was gonna say, more falls into like when you have like a wide receiver 3 or 4. It's a chaser game. He goes 3 for 91 and a touchdown or something, and it kind of comes out of the woodwork where he's not really getting targets consistently. A-Chain looked the part. He was an upside guy. He was fast. He was an attractive player where he was going. So he showed in the first game, but. If you get him this week and he scores 12 fantasy points, I think you're okay with that. If but he still has that potential, especially if Miami's offense can be explosive. So you're getting in the range. Okay, I'll take 11 out of him in occasional couple big games. And if Mostert gets banged up, he should get more value. Obviously, Jeff Wilson's a week away and he'll probably be a factor as well. And he won't get all the show, but the direction of him, you would like him to get a few more catches, and that might happen this week. We don't know how Mostert got 7 catches last week, and that's really high, probably the most of his career in any game. So this, I think he doesn't fall into chasing points because of, his potential, where sometimes when you got a receiver that, slides in there and has a good game, out of nowhere, like that's like you feel like you want to play him, but, that's more falls into the, kind of chasing, or even a running back, like a McKinnon last week, you slide him in like I should play McKinnon. He scored 2 touchdowns. And he seemed like he plays better with Tony out of the lineup. But, he just really had, about 5 touches. He had 2 catches for 2 touchdowns and, a few rushes. But, if the matchup's right for them, they look for the backs at the goal line. So, last year he had 2 30-point games and the rest of them were not so great. But, there's at times where you're going to be able to have the right matchup and get them in the lineup. So A-Chain it is.
Yeah, I know. I had McKinnon in a couple of times 2 weeks ago, and I think actually maybe even 1 week. That's a problem when you build a lot of depth, and you said it since day one, 20, 30 years ago. You build your core, and then you build the depth, but the less amount of questions you have is the less amount of mistakes that you will have. You play your studs. You always play your studs. Yeah, you'll question a few times. The only true question we ever had, or at least I ever had, is when my stud wide receiver was going up against Revis Island. That was the only, Shawn, do I play him or I don't play him? And that's the Calvin Johnsons of the world and some of the other big time wide receivers. He was the true shutdown guy in fantasy.
Well, what about Deion Sanders? Prime time.
He wasn't Revis Island.
You don't think so?
No.
I think Deion Sanders was was the better cornerback than. We have to check.
Well,
the stats.
more electric, more maybe. We remember him for the pick sixes and the dancing and the punt returns and the kickoffs for the dancing, and then even Denzel says, "Yeah, Revis at least would tackle." So that's for another show. So the scroll has been going the whole time, guys. If you're not following Shawn on Twitter, go to Shawn_Childs. Get his work at Full Time Fantasy. But most of all, go to www.fantasyanalysis.substack.com. Subscribe. It's literally pennies on the dollar. If my math is correct, for a monthly subscription will cost you 30 cents a day. Okay. Something stupid like that. I mean, it's pennies on the dollar. Go into your seat cushion right now, lift up your seat cushion, or go into your car ashtray. You got plenty of change here. For the year, you can get it for like $80. Go support them. Myself and Shawn will be back next Friday. Hopefully one of us or everyone here hits the millie at 4 o'clock, not 3 o'clock, at 4 o'clock. 3 men in the box. Matt Grissom and Quentin Mills will be back talking college football. And then right after that at 5 o'clock, our trip to LA with Ron at Ron A Sports. For myself, Jeff Dawson at EC Sports Invest, the Hall of Famer himself, Mr. Shawn Childs at Shawn_Childs. We wish everyone a great afternoon. Better than the U.S. in the Ryder Cup, at least. And we'll see you soon.